let me see if we have any questions coming in now. From Pei Ling Tay, can we know how many devices will the host be required to have in order to run a successful webinar? So if you're the host, normally you don't take charge of the entire webinar by yourself. If you are only one person, you would usually have a panelist with you to run the whole webinar. I will refer to the diagram that I've drafted up for you guys. So you're the host, you have your speakers, your presenter as your co-host or your panelists. You guys will form the whole committee for this webinar. So you only really need one device, which is your internet device, to host this meeting, and then you can assign roles in this meeting. So if you ask me how many devices would you need, I would say one is enough. Earlier on, I mentioned that in a webinar, you have your host, your co-host, and your panelists. And then you guys in the audiences will be the attendees. So what are the roles and how do they contribute to a successful Zoom webinar? For the host, you can change the role of any panelist and place them into the audience so that they can become a panelist. They join, in a sense, your committee right now, and they have the same rights as a panelist. You can also, as the host, provide your panelists remote control. So say, for example, I'm not the only one making a presentation today. Perhaps Indra is making a presentation, or Rayan is making a presentation, or Hafiz is making a presentation. I'll then share a remote functions for them to do so. As a host, I can also start and end the meeting for everyone involved here today. So you have your panelists, which is according to the diagram, your host and your co-host, your presenter and your moderators. They have the roles of either providing technical support, event support, or guest speaker. Say, for example, if you're having a webinar today, you want to invite a special guest from NUS or NUH to do a talk on a specific topic, you would send an invite to him as a panelist. So they will, for NLB webinars, the directive is to set them as co-hosts instead of just a panelist, because using co-host privileges, they can then share their own slides, they can have their own webcam. It's a better way for us to keep track of who are on the panelists. So just remember, if you have a guest speaker, just invite them to your webinar and give them the role of co-host. Panelists are able to handle the general audience chat as well. If you can check on your clients, if you're coming on a web browser or mobile device, you can see that you have the option to chat. And right now, I've given you guys the option to chat with our panelists. Of course, there's also the option to chat with one another in the audiences, but in generally it's disabled because you don't want people to know who are attending this webinar and you don't want them to chat with each other. As a panelist, we have the privilege to look at the raised hands in this audience, and my co-host here today can enable your mic and audio if you guys wish to speak up. They are also helping me with the social media channel streams, which is Facebook, YouTube, and Workplace. Just something for you to note, if I enable allow to talk for you guys in the attendees, you will be able to enable your microphone now to speak. If we have time today, later, I will play around with some of these roles to enable you guys to become a part of the panelists so they can experience yourself for the controls. But for those of you guys in the audiences right now who are very curious on how it looks like on my end, this is my screen. So this will be the Zoom webinar page that the host sees. I can see, firstly, the participants in this webinar. I can see the general chat log. I can share my screen like a normal Zoom meetings. I can conduct a poll if I so wish. I can record the webinar itself to post-process later. I can bring up the Q&A panel to look at the questions that my audiences are curious about and asking. The closed caption is more of a manual captioning feature in Zoom. I will go into that later, but just to show you guys more information, this is what practice mode allows. Early on, if you schedule your webinar to have the practice mode, you can actually conduct your own Zoom meetings a number of times before you actually go live. Early on, we broadcasted at 2 p.m. in practice mode. So my team, myself, Indra, Rayan, and Hafiz, we were actually practicing the webinar before we started at 2:30. Once you click broadcast, however, at 2:30, the webinar is live, and then your audiences can start coming in. So right now, this webinar is live. As you can see, the green bar on top is broadcasting to all attendees. Anyone with the invitation can join. So the panelists that I've mentioned on the right side, this is where it looks slightly different from your screen. I have a panelist on my left and the attendees on my right. So for today's panelists will be, as I mentioned, the PixelStudio crew, and attendees will be you guys. What I can do here is actually go into the options that I have. I can either mute my co-host, allow my co-host to rename themselves. I can lock the webinar to prevent any more attendees or panelists from coming in. I can even allow my panelists, my co-hosts, my moderators to start their own video. From the beginning, you saw Indra making the introduction. You were able to see his webcam. So these are the features that you can allow your panelists or your co-hosts. What can the host do? The host can also allow you guys to raise your hand and see the participant count. Right now, you can see how many participants are in this Zoom webinar if I allow it. And I can also alter your video layout, whether you want to be following my host view or the active speaker view or gallery view. So there are a number of options that are available to the host themselves. Say, for example, I have a guest attendee for my webinar, which is you guys in the audiences. I can allow you to talk. I can promote you as a panelist to give you the same rights as my community. I can rename or remove you from this meeting. So here is an example of having a guest attendee promoted to a panelist. Once he's on the panel, I can have different options for him. I can either make him the host of this webinar or the co-host. I can change his role back to the attendee, that means effectively demoting him back to an audience. So let's say I promote him to a co-host. So now he shares the same privileges as the co-host, when in fact he was from an attendee of the event. So as a co-host, I can make him the host. I can make him the host. I can withdraw his co-host permission. I've now demoted him back to attendee after withdrawing his co-host privileges.